would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Stephen. My name is Catherine Boone. I'm a professor at LSE in the departments of government and international development. I've been at the LSE and in the UK for 8 years. I did my PhD in the United States and worked at an American institution for about 20 years before I came to the UK. So, you know, I have very long involvement in these large PhD programs on both sides of the Atlantic and a couple different departments here at the LSE. So, you know, so I'm very, very interested in responding to your questions. My own research is in the field of political science. I work on the sort of comparative politics of developing countries with a focus on Africa mostly. And for about the last 10 years or so, my research is focused basically on land policy and the political economy of land and land politics. I teach African political economy here at the LSE in the 2 departments, and a course in government called New Approaches in Comparative Political Economy. So that's my background, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks to the organizers.
Thank you. Adeoti.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Adeoti Dipeolu. I'm currently a doctoral candidate at the African Leadership Center at King's College London, so just across the road from LSE. My background, I have a bachelor's in international relations and a master's in public policy. And my current work sort of straddles the security development nexus, actually studying leadership with reference to security and development. My research is looking at the role and relationship of the diaspora with their homelands, with a case study of Liberia, and just trying to understand the relationships these diaspora form with their homeland, and especially in the context of post-conflict reconstruction and peace building, and what this means for how they are engaging and what sorts of outputs are emerging from this engagement. I also have a wider interest in migration and the intersection between migration and security. Thank you.
So I'll go. I'm Stephanie. I am at LSE doing my PhD. My background is in law. I studied law in Kenya, and then I came to the UK to do my master's in African studies. And now I'm doing my PhD in political science. And what I'm looking at is basically theoretical alternatives to the Western models of statehood applied in Africa. So for example, I mean, in essence, if we could redraw what states look like in Africa, what would those look like? But then also I'm looking at the ways in which the state is reimagined and, you know, contested in African literature and African art. Yeah, so that's me.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, guys. For those who just joined, in terms of questions, you can either pop your questions into the chat box or you can raise your hand and ask them directly. To get us started, I approached some of the academics who work at LSE supervising PhD students and asked them for what they thought some good questions were. And we also asked those of you who registered to submit some. So I'm going to pop some off, but for those of you who want to ask questions, or please feel free to jump in at any time. So from one of our submitted questions, what is the best way to engage a potential supervisor for your PhD? And this is open to the floor. You guys can answer in whatever order you'd like.
Well, should I take a stab at that?
Yeah.
So the process of approaching a supervisor as such is very specific to the UK. It's certainly not a feature of US programs, but the idea of the PhD in the UK, which is a much shorter program than it is in the US, is that indeed you come to the program with a project and a dissertation research proposal that is well developed. So, the best way to approach a potential supervisor is with a well-developed PhD proposal that supervisor presumably will be interested in, or something that relates to that person's research interests. So I can elaborate if you want me to, but let me stop there so I don't go on too long.
Cool.
If I can just jump in there, I think, Catherine's correct. I think from my experience, for example, as somebody who, applied, the UK is unique in that, you do have to come with your proposal to a potential supervisor. I think the piece of advice I would give is do your research well. Looking at the institutions you're trying to apply to, I would say look for the supervisors that sort of best fit what you're interested in. Sometimes you won't get the exact match, but it's important to be as close as possible, because that also then sort of drives that interest from the potential supervisors. And as Catherine said, you want to have some form of a proposal ready to be able to share with them so they can see the direction of your research and your thinking. In some cases, if they are interested, they can work with you and ask you to go back and sort of address a few things and then resubmit the proposal before starting the process.
Yeah, I think they both said really important things. And the thing about America was really interesting because I discovered that while I was approaching American supervisors who are like, what? But then, yeah, in the UK, you can and should approach supervisors. And I think it's a really interesting and exciting, I think maybe for me, it was the most exciting part of the PhD process, just reaching out to them and establishing a relationship with them. And I mean, I would suggest that you approach supervisors that you have a genuine interest in. So maybe people that you've read before, or people whose approach you really enjoy or really like. But yeah, that whole process generally is exciting if you find people whose interests overlap with yours. Because, for example, as much as I chose the LSE, I'm still in contact with my supervisors from my other options. So it doesn't have to be a process that stops there. It's just a really interesting process anyway in establishing contacts with academics in your field.
Great, thanks guys. I have another question also around supervisors. Will applicants need a supervisor in advance of applying for you, obviously within the UK context? Catherine, do you want to take us away again?
Yeah. So I'm beginning, so the word need, I mean, the system is kind of set up such that when you apply, you write, so the applications go to departments, to the institutional unit. You don't apply directly as such to an individual. So when you apply, you say, oh, I've so-and-so, Stephanie Wanga has expressed interest in being my supervisor, or I've spoken to her about this proposal and she's expressed interest. And so then when that proposal comes into the department, the administrators who are responsible for filtering out the applications then will kick that file back to the person so named and say, well, is that, here's the full proposal submitted by this person. What do you think about it? And so on. So no one would commit to supervising anyone, I don't think, without having seen the full proposal. And, there is another step too. I mean, if a department may accept maybe 5 people in a given year, and it could be that 10 students have corresponded productively with 10 different faculty members. So here's 10 potential, relationships, but the department will only accept 5 persons. And so there is this kind of back and forth process of sorting everything out, that these many steps that have to be taken to get from the beginning to the end of the admissions process.
Great. Stephanie or Adeoti, do you have anything to add?
Not necessarily. I think Catherine covered it quite well. If anything, I would say that your not necessarily advised to actually apply concretely until like you sort of establish that your work is going to be accepted, you know, by the potential supervisor. But then, yeah, so in a sense, there's like an informal acceptance of this is fine, go ahead and submit and apply, you know, formally to the program, essentially.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, it's just even nice for your own peace of mind to know that somebody in there wants to work with you as you apply. So if anything, you could do it for that, you know. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys. Okay, a question from Bola. Should the proposal go with the very first introductory email? Same again?
I mean, I think you know, just realistically speaking, like myself, for example, you know, I take probably one student a year and I receive probably 50 inquiries. And, you know, and probably, unfortunately, not really deliberately, but there's a, you know, good share of those that I probably don't even reply to because, you know, I can't read and analyze. You know, I try to reply and say, look, please apply to someone, or I'm not taking any students, or, you know, different school would be better for you. I do try to help the person a little bit, but, you know, these faculty members, you know, receive many cold calls. And so that's certainly going to be a factor shaping these relationships. And, you know, I think what the faculty members really want is somebody who can further their own research agenda, you know, so somebody who's going to be working in the same area, what they do will contribute to what I'm doing, is going to bring my research forward. You know, perhaps we would work together. They might be able to work for me as a research assistant. So, you know, there is this kind of intense synergy, and, you know, it's very hard to get, you know, really the right mix. So I think with respect to the question about sending the proposal, I just would say probably the best thing to do would be to write to the person and explain why you're contacting them in particular. Because I do think some people just have like a robot call, you know, they just like blast the system, and, you know, and to, you know, give a very succinct description of the person's background and what they're interested in doing. Because what these faculty members or professors are going to look for is somebody who's already well advanced in the research area and who has very close research interests to their own.
Great, thanks. Would Stephanie and Adeoti, would you like to add to that at all? Okay, I do have one that's come up a couple of times now. This might be university specific, but let's find out. Do you need a distinction in your MSc to be considered for a PhD? I have a first-class degree, but worry my MSc grade merit might disadvantage me. So yeah, in terms of marks for applying for PhDs, what is a good range? Should we start from the other end? Adeoti, do you want to go?
Yeah, no problem. That's a really good question, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that might be university specific. I will say for my example, my master's, I had a very high merit, but I had a distinction in my dissertation, which I suspect might have assisted, you know, because I mean, if anything, I think in the UK, so I did my undergrad in the US, and so I've from being here, I've definitely seen that there's a lot more attention is paid to the first degree and sort of the grades that come out of the first degree. And that sort of sometimes shapes, you know, application processes for a lot of things. So I think, again, look at the universities you're applying to, look at the programs and sort of look at their eligibility criteria. I think that's the best way to sort of get an answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. Catherine and Stephanie, would you like to add anything to that?
I mean, I guess I would just say that, I mean, I'm not sure, but then the thing is that if you feel like you're lacking in one area, then go crazy on the other areas that you can still help. You know, so if there's room to improve your grade at this moment, improve it. But then if there's no room to improve your grade, make sure your proposal is excellent. You know, get other people to help you, make sure the rest of your application is as strong as it could be, because I don't think it is like a do or die rule about, you know, what your grades will mean in the future, but then, you know, what you can change, what you can help, you know, but then I really don't know if there's a strict answer to that question.
Great.
I mean, I think I can confirm that I think the sort of standard rule, or the way they traditionally think about it in the UK, is that, you know, in their sort of traditionally it would all be a continuous process, and part of the reason they put so much effort into grading the MSc students is because in a way it's a bit of a process of like selecting the ones that are PhD material. So the distinction is in a way sort of that kind of signaling. But that said, I think now the origins of the students in terms of the kinds of master's programs they come to is much more diverse. And there's more diversity in the background of the students. So you may not even have a master's from the LSE, or, you know, you may have, you know, there just may be some more heterogeneity in your background, and, you know, as Stephanie was saying, some other reason why that department or that faculty member may want to work with you. And so, you know, traditionally it was a sort of, I don't know if a rule is right, but you know that we are in the UK, it's very bureaucratic. So I think they did kind of use that as a standard selection mechanism, and it is a kind of default selection mechanism. I think in the departments I'm in, if a student doesn't have that that mark from their preceding degree, but we want to accept the person, we have to petition to the school to admit.
Okay, great. Thanks for the answers. So I'm trying to keep these sort of on themes, but there will be some jumping around because there's some variation in questions. And to our audience, please feel free to pop them in the chat or stick up your hand. Our next one is the eternal scholarship questions. So the question is, what kind of experiences do you need in order to secure a PhD scholarship? Is it necessary to have published papers or spoken at conferences before applying for scholarships? Should we start with you, Stephanie?
Okay, scholarships. So I will start by saying I did get a scholarship, but then I'm not the most, you know, I don't speak everywhere, so it's achievable. It's very, very achievable if I could get if I could get scholarships. But then, I mean, what I would advise is look for schools that already are leaning towards giving you funding. You know, so for example, American universities for PhD have a lot of funding, and in the UK, a university like LSE is pretty good on funding, I think. So I think look at the schools already existing kind of propensity to fund. So kind of like shoot your shot at a place that seems accessible, not accessible, I mean, reach for the stars, but then still, you know, do intelligent shooting. But yeah, I don't think you have to be, I don't know, some kind of genius, but then try to really show your excellence in whatever pockets of excellence exist in your life, you know, just shine where you can, you know, talk yourself up, believe in those small and big things that you've done. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Great. Adeoti and Catherine, anything you'd like to add?
So I think my experience is a bit different. So I can't really speak too much on the issue of scholarships, but I think Stephanie was quite right. Like, you want to pick on everything you've done that puts you in good light. I think, honestly, how you put together your scholarship package really, really speaks to sort of the response you can get or will get. These things are quite tricky. I think any type of funding, so securing any type of funding can be quite tricky, but you would definitely want to put yourself in a good light. You know, everything you've done that's some form of achievement, you want to speak to it, but you also just want to make sure that you're looking at the eligibility criteria of scholarships, and just making sure you're actually falling into that criteria, because sometimes these funders are quite unforgiving, you know, and, you know, once they see that you don't meet like just one single part of their eligibility criteria, they don't even consider you. So I think it's important to make sure that what you're applying for, you're suitable for. But yeah, other than that, I don't have too much by way of advice on scholarships.
I mean, if I could add something to what the others have said, which, and I do agree with everything they've said. For the PhD programs, really there are kind of three basic sources of funding. One is the school itself, so like the LSE itself or Oxford itself. One is, you know, some third party, like some governments offer PhD funding for their students, like to get a PhD in the UK, or some professional associations offer that kind of funding. And then the third source of funding is some people self-fund, you know, they just use their own money. But with respect to the institution or the university, so let's say in the case of the LSE, in the International Development Department, we get, let's say, about 100 or 150 applications a year. And of those, you know, we may interview about 15 or 18 people. And of those, you know, we may make an offer to 8 people. And of those 8, we will only have funding for 3. So the funding is really very contingent on the extent to which the department thinks that you really match, you know, the kind of PhD student that they're going to be able to accept. So the topic is good, you're well prepared, you're matched with the advisor, and, you know, and the advisor is really going to go to bat for you and try to argue, you know, compete with the other colleagues and compete up against the other candidates to try to get funding for you. And so, I mean, I think kind of sort of being eligible, let's say in this example, probably 50 of those people were technically speaking eligible. And then it's, you know, the funding is just reserved for these few people. In the United States, it's true what Stephanie said earlier on. I think it's generally true that the top programs in the United States, let's say the top 25 universities, fund more students. And that's because the students, you know, work in the departments teaching the undergraduates. And so it's kind of a job. In the Scandinavian universities, you know, what they do is they'll get funding for, let's say, like an 8-year project on forest conservation in Africa. And that 8-year project they may get from the, let's say, Swedish Research Council includes money for 4 PhDs. So 4 people are going to be seen through their entire PhD process. So then people will apply for that to get that particular funding. And the words they use in that system are really hiring a PhD. So they're going to hire you into this slot, and you're going to work on this project for 4 or 5 years and be paid the whole time and do this research, and you're going to get your PhD out of it. So the funding is really, I mean, I would say the Swedish case is kind of extreme, but it is kind of matched to contributing to the ongoing research within that unit, especially in the UK. So, I mean, I think everybody really needs to think about, you know, really, do they really want to do a PhD? And, you know, like, how do they fit into that department, and what are they proposing, and, you know, go through these kind of steps about thinking really about what you want to do and what is the best degree strategy for you before investing too much in applying for PhD programs, because it's very arduous, and, you know, it's you know, kind of very particular, and you know, it's not easy to get really a good match with a student, the proposal, the advisor, the school. Of course, you know, we do it, and you know, we love the students and we love the PhD programs, but it's really a long and you know, complicated process to make it work. And I'm sure Adeoti and Stephanie can speak to that, having been through it from the other side.
Great, thanks guys. Those are some excellent answers there. So our next question might be a bit too specific for you guys, but I've made a plan. So it's, what are scholarship opportunities for students from the African continent? Gillian is going to pop some links in the chat, both for LSE scholarships and I think some broader ones. But if any of our panel have good recommendations, those would also be massively appreciated.
The only one that's sort of coming to mind right now, I mean, I think both Stephanie and Catherine were very correct in what they said. And I think somebody mentioned, look at your, depending on the country you're from, you know, look at your governments. Like, a lot of them offer funding for, you know, to train their nationals. So, you know, I would say explore that option. I think one that's come to mind is the Commonwealth. I think they're quite well known for providing funding or giving funding to students from specific countries to come and do like PhDs. So I would look into that. Yeah, not too many else. And then of course, check the departments, as has been already said.
I think maybe one thing I could add to that is it's rare to find a fully funded PhD opportunity being offered by a third party, you know, like even a government or the UN or the Commonwealth or whatever. Usually those third parties offer supplementary funding. So you've been in your PhD program, you've been working for 3 years, and then they offer you supplementary funding for the 4th year or for the 5th year to get, you know, all the way through the process, or maybe funding for research. It seems like those third parties often target the master's level a little bit more, because they figure, you know, let's give you a chance, do your master's, and if you do a great master's, then you should be able to get into, you know, a PhD program that hopefully will fund you. So I think I'm not aware of many opportunities where they, you know, like the European countries, as part of their European-wide funding, has PhD scholarships that they fully funded PhD scholarships for European students, but the students don't exactly apply directly. They're kind of channeled through the university institutions. And so I think the idea of a fully funded scholarship is more common at the master's level. But I haven't clicked on this link, these links that Jillian sent out. So, you know, maybe, I mean, there could be some, you know, there could well be opportunities there that I don't know about, but many are for continuing PhD students, I would say, in my experience.
Great.
Yeah, and just to add, for the Commonwealth, you might also want to be sure about the Commonwealth scholarship that you're applying for, because some require you not to have studied in the UK before. So if you're already studying in the UK, that might be a bit tricky. So, but then Commonwealth has many different types of scholarships. So maybe look at the one that you're specifically interested in. But many schools have the scholarships that they offer, both within the school and outside the school, on their website. So just look at the specific school that you're interested in.
Great, thank you guys. So we've done a lot of questions on applying for PhDs, funding, but I think we should now get into the actual doing of PhDs. So we've got a couple of questions here. fairly straightforward one. Do all PhDs require coursework? Catherine, I think this has your name written all over it.
So I think in the social sciences, as far as I know, in the UK system, until recently, they did not. I mean, the idea was that you did your coursework in your first degree and in your master's, and then you would have this dissertation proposal that was all ready to go. And as soon as you got into the PhD program, you would start working on your proposal, working on that research project that you proposed. I think, and these, long periods of coursework were more characteristic of the US programs. I think the UK now is changing and starting to require in some programs, and I think this is happening pretty much across the LSE, starting to require more coursework of the students in the PhD program. So at the LSE, we created, a kind of year of coursework that in international development and government is called the MRes, or Masters in Research, as kind of a year of coursework that is the first of a 4-year PhD program. So more programs are starting to ask for coursework, but traditionally and probably throughout most of the UK, it's not a requirement. Maybe Adeoti can tell us how it is in her institution.
Thank you. So at King's, it's not so much like it's not mandatory, but I think there are a few courses that they require you to sort of take. So if I speak to my experience, we have to submit a progress report every so often, so every quarter or so. And within that, there is a section that sorts of asks you the trainings and courses you've done. And in a sense, this sort of tracks whether or not you've tapped into what we call the LIS DTP network. So I think it's a collaboration between Queen Mary and UCL, I think. And they offer all sorts of courses from methodology, how to do a literature review, quantitative data analysis, all sorts of courses. And you're sort of encouraged to take those courses throughout your PhD study. Of course, you'll take courses depending on what stage you are. And then in my specific department, you're actually required as part of your PhD, when you start the first year, you have to sit in the core module of the MSc class, which is our leadership and society class, because that's where you sort of learn the framework of leadership, the theories, and just to sort of augment your reading that you'd already be doing. So all our PhD students spend the year sitting in the core master's class, and then you take the other courses through the course of your study, essentially. Yeah.
Great, Stephanie, would you like to add anything to that? Excellent. Okay, actually, Catherine, you touched on this, but what is the difference between an MRes PhD and an MPhil PhD?
An MPhil is not a PhD. It's an M.
Okay. That was one of the questions that we had submitted there. Okay.
Oh, sorry. I mean, maybe the person means some people do an MPhil and then go on to do a PhD. And some people do an MRes and then go on to a PhD. So an MPhil is, I think, a 2-year master's, usually. Whereas like in the LSE, most of our master's programs are 1 year. Like an MSc in international development or an MSc in government is just an MSc and it's 1 year. So either an MPhil or an MSc can precede starting the PhD. And then once you're you know, if you came to the LSE in one of these departments, you would still do an MRes. So you would be doing basically another degree, but it is be kind of packaged in with your PhD program. The good thing about the MPhil is you have 2 years, and so you may do a more substantial master's thesis that, you know, sort of brings you farther in developing that proposal than that you would be, you know, shopping around as you were looking for admission to a PhD program.
Great. Our next one, this is quite an interesting one. Yeah, what are challenges that may be unique to African students applying or doing PhDs in the UK? Stephanie, do you want to start? Or do you need a moment to think about that? Not a problem. And to our audience, please feel free to submit questions. I may run out of questions at some point, and then I'm just going to be making them up. Yeah, if any of our panelists could speak to that.
Well, that's so. I think I saw this question before today, and I was already like, you know, how do you answer that?
Phil allows for all the open honesty, so you can go, you can speak as freely as you'd like.
I mean, I don't know if I really have an answer, but I will say this. From my experience, and I think depending on the sort of research you're doing and where you're looking at, resources sometimes can be very hard to come by. Your library might not always have the required articles, or they're not necessarily signed up to specific journals. And so you really have to shop around across different universities, libraries, to sort of find what you're looking for. And I think a lot of it, at least this is my opinion, is depending on sort of the focus of a lot of departments. So if there isn't really like a very heavy Africa focused program, for example, the library might not actually have access to some of these sources that you need, or they've just never been requested from the library. You know, nobody's actually done the topic before, so like the library's never had to like have these resources available. So I would say that I think for me that's how I would answer that question, is in terms of what you might require to be able to actually do the research, depending on what you're looking at.
Yeah, I think those are super important points. But I was thinking about my own challenges, because I've studied for 2 degrees in the UK, or this is my second one. And I was thinking, you know, what were my challenges? But, you know, I mean, there's obvious, this is not home, right? So for anybody who this is not home for, that's a challenge in itself. But then I think, okay, so I'm going to kind of not answer this question very well, but I'm hopefully going to give an indirect answer. So I think the challenges that you face, whatever challenges those are, because there can and probably will be many, those challenges, what you need to do, I would say, to kind of help you go through them, is make sure that you've really applied to the best possible place for you to do the thing that you want to do. So for example, your particular degree, if it can really best be done at the LSE, or LSE is one of the really good institutions for that particular degree, then I think that helps you work through whatever challenges you may face. Because of course, as Adeoti was saying, if, for example, the department doesn't focus much on Africa, that could be a huge challenge. So, but then my question would then be did you look at this department before you applied? So I would really say, look for departments that focus on what you want to focus on, with people who are working on the things that you want to work on, so that that kind of alienation doesn't happen. So if possibly the institution that gives you the best kinds of resources is not LSE, or is not an institution in the UK, go to the institution that will help you most. But if it is the LSE, because, you know, ironically, in some ways, there's a lot of stuff here that we can access that we can't access back home. So if you see that that's the case for you, then that should help you keep going. And then, you come here, there's all sorts of things to mitigate the challenges. There's networks for African students that we create for ourselves. There's the center that we are going to use to help PhD students. There's all sorts of networks that crop up to help each other kind of just work through whatever challenges that you face. But I think a lot of them are surmountable. You can live through whatever challenges you face, I think, possibly.
I mean, I think Stephanie touched on something in terms of, depending on where you go to, you might not find many in your cohort who might be coming, from your country or other countries on the African continent. So there will be those feelings of isolation and loneliness and not being able to connect on a certain level with people. And like she rightly said, there are networks, even if it's not within your university, reach out to research groups, reach out across. I mean, yeah, there's definitely ways to keep connected with people. But I also am of the opinion that sometimes those are the best experiences when there's not too many around us, because then it allows you to also explore the world and speak to other people and learn about other worldviews and experiences. And, you find that sort of shapes your journey also. Of course, you'll always miss home. You'll miss being around people, similar to you. But sometimes I think that also boxes us into a whole. And it's important for us, especially like if you've come to another country, to explore that country, to explore the people and explore those in your cohort, essentially.
Great. Catherine, do you have anything to add from a supervisor's perspective on this?
Well, I mean, I would, with speaking about students who are already in PhD programs, I would certainly reinforce everything that Adeoti and Stephanie have said. One thing that I can add is that, I mean, doing a PhD, it can be a very lonely and isolating experience for everyone. And I think doing one in the UK and in London can be particularly difficult because, people are really dispersed. I mean, the net, like this idea of a cohort actually can be challenging to really bring to life. I mean, there may not be a cohort to join is what I mean. So, but I think, I've had students from European countries and Central American countries, China, sometimes, and they kind of build networks themselves. And, the departments kind of try, but they kind of try, but they really don't do a very good job. And the LSE is not really a very conducive place to building networks. And I think part of the reason is it's because it's a big city and people are from everywhere. And when people go home, I mean, they don't spend much time maybe physically present at the LSE. And I think there are a lot of kind of reasons, but yeah, definitely you have to build your own networks and try to survive. Yeah.
Great. Viveka, I am not forgetting your question, but Tenny has just asked one that is really relevant to what we've just spoken about. Similar to the last question, what do you think are the opportunity costs of doing a PhD in an African country? I have a strong desire to do this, but I'm aware that I can be locked out of some spaces. Thinking about mitigating this by finding a, quote, Western co-supervisor. So yeah, PhDs in African countries as opposed to the UK.
I think my gut answer to that is find a university that has a joint degree with a university in Africa. I think that then gives you the opportunity to study within the context within which you want to study, but also then gives you that opportunity for exposure to, as you said, the Western supervisor, or just an opportunity to be able to then come to the UK or the US, depending on what it is, and then, give you that opportunity of, I guess, the best of both worlds. But other than that, I don't know if I can speak too much about the question.
I think it's a really good question, and a question that I struggled with, and in some sense still struggle with, just because it's a good question, but my first thought would just be go where your study or your proposed thesis or whatever you want to do best fits, where you'll get the best level of support, where you will be able to do everything you want to do to the best level. So chase the supervisor that you want to work with, the institution that you want to work with, that wherever that is, because I see many good reasons for studying a PhD in Africa, just for just obvious reasons of, these are people who are obviously on the ground with the things that you want to study. The context is there. You're where you need to be, really. And I think that can be enriching in itself. And there's very solid academics working in Africa that I want to work with, which is why I also am trying to push for this exchange between LSE and other institutions, just because, as Adeoti was pointing out, you could get the best of both worlds. So for example, I think LSE does a good amount of exchange, not necessarily with Africa, but then they do study abroad with other institutions in other places. So, and I think a lot of PhD work you can make kind of work for you. So if you want to find yourself in a particular institution, you can establish those relationships at this level because it's grown-up level. So you can still establish relationships with the academics that you want to be in contact with. You can still invite them for conferences. So there's many ways, I think, to go around the thing, but it's a really good question.
Great. Catherine, would you like to add to that at all?
The only thing, maybe one thing to add about this is something we've not really talked much about is thinking about what you want to do with this PhD and, what is the purpose, as it were. And I think this shapes the answer to this question quite a bit. I know people, let's say in Kenya, if I can use Kenya as an example, people with PhDs from Kenyan universities are teaching in East Africa, in other East African universities. I think there's some very senior academics. So let's say they have their PhD from Nairobi or Dar es Salaam, and they sort of work for 30 years and they're now like a 50 or 60-year-old professor. Then these people then sometimes land in let's say on the US academic circuit, but it's hard to it's a much farther path, if you want, to go from a PhD in an African institution to a faculty position in, outside your region. I think that even within Africa, the degrees maybe don't necessarily travel far out of the national context, probably because, in many African countries, once let's say you have a Nigerian or Ghanaian or Kenyan PhD, you have a lot of competition within that national context. So, I don't know if there are many Kenyan PhDs who teach at a Ugandan university or a Tanzanian university. In the past, I think that was very true when the universities were more regional, but these days I'm not sure. So I think, it really requires quite a bit of thinking about what you want to do with the PhD. So like if you want to go into the business or private sector or work in the NGOs, I think these are kind of more, more variation in where people come from and where they get their degrees and where they go than the academic route.
Great, thanks for those answers, guys. And I think one more question and then any last thoughts from you guys. So Viveka says, Thank you for answering all these questions. When is the right time to apply for a PhD? Is it advisable to do so right after your master's? Do we have any insight into that question?
That's a really good question. I think it sort of links into what Catherine was saying. I think you have to think about why you're doing the PhD in the first instance. I think that's very fundamental, period, even before applying, is asking yourself the question, why am I doing this PhD? So for me, I would say I took about a year and something off, almost 2 years after my master's, if not 3. I always at one point knew I was going to do a PhD. I didn't realize it would be as soon as it was. But I found at least that having practical experience, especially if you're like trying to work in a specific area, is quite helpful. Because sometimes, when you then think about the job market, especially if you're not trying to teach, sometimes you then have to face the daunting task of, do I have other relevant skills for this job that I want to apply for? You'll have the expertise, definitely, but sometimes you might not have like other skills. So I think my answer to that is, you need to know yourself. Can you keep going straight after a master's? Because a PhD, as Catherine said, is a really long journey. And yeah, you need to know, like, can I keep at it? Will I burn out? Or does it make sense for me to take a step back, really review why I want to do the PhD, what I want to do the PhD in, and also just take time out to do your research. I think that space to do the research of the PhDs, of the institutions, of the supervisors, very important. So I wouldn't say there's a hard or fast rule as to yes or no. I think it's about knowing yourself and sort of asking yourself the fundamental questions about doing a PhD.
Yeah, for sure. I would say the same. It really depends on who you are and where you're trying to go. And this is where I would probably talk to people who are kind of where I want to be and see what they would say about the paths that they would advise me to take. But yeah, like Adeoti, I also took a year off after my master's. I went to work. Then you see, I mean, for me, I love research. Like, I just want to go back to the research. So this just felt like that the next step for me. It's home. I love being stuck in this world, But as Catherine and Adeoti have pointed out, it's hard. It's hard. It's much harder than I thought it would be, actually, because I mean, a lot of people said a PhD is going to be hard. I'm not even at the PhD level because I'm still in my MRes year, but then it's hard. So it just depends on what you want, and yeah, really ask yourself if it's going to be a PhD, if this is worth it. Yeah.
She's honest.
Catherine, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think what has been said is really important. I would endorse. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we can round up here. Is there anything each of you would like to add? Like a bit that we've missed, obviously, an hour is not enough time to cover all the complexities of studying a PhD. But yeah, is there anything you'd like to add? Think that would be good for potential PhD students to know ahead of doing it? Yeah.
Can I say something there?
Yeah.
So I think, maybe one thing to stress is, or highlight, is in the UK, I think we're talking mostly about the UK. The basic concept is that the PhD is a continuation of what you did your master's in. And the idea, I think that it's not literally true for everyone, but this is kind of the default. And that you've done all this work for 1 or 2 years on your master's, you've done all the reading, you have this expertise, and that you're going to take it one step farther, or you'll take it farther in your PhD. So I think the path of least resistance is to think about, how does your PhD proposal grow out of your MSc work? Like, what did you learn from the MSc, like substantively, methodologically, theoretically, and then how will you continue on that path as a PhD student, rather than, you know, kind of saying, well, I've just thought up this new idea and I'd like to jump in. I mean, the more you can make it, the more you can connect it to your existing academic work and expertise, you know, the more it will look like a PhD project that is kind of growing out of your previous academic training and expertise. I think that's you know, basically the default way of thinking about it.
So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, ask yourself why you want to do the PhD. I think, I'm not gonna lie, I think I spent the first year of my PhD asking myself why I was doing a PhD, because like Stephanie said, it's just really hard. It requires a lot of self-motivation. And that's why I said you really need to know yourself. You need to know what you're capable of. And if it's something you're really, really passionate about, I think they use the word passion in PhD for a reason, because sometimes it's that passion that will end up driving you, like in your lowest moments, in like the moments where your brain is just completely like, I'm over this. Just, you know, sort of remember why you're doing it, why you're so interested in the topic that you're doing or doing research in. And I would say, as lonely as it is, talk to people. I have found, from talking to colleagues, to other peers, to just even family, friends, that sometimes it helps refresh your memory. It helps refresh, you know, helps you think through your research. You know, and that's why sometimes they say, can you share your research idea with somebody in lay terms? You know, because it means that you're not overcomplicating things, but also helps you think through, what am I actually trying to do? If somebody read my work, would it make sense to them? Of course, our supervisors and examiners are all academics, so, you know, they'll be able to grasp like the broader theoretical concepts and everything, but like, can somebody pick up my work and it will make sense to them? So I think, you know, speak to people. Yeah, and do your research. Like I said, do your research on the cost of it. It is expensive to do a PhD, especially if you're an international student. Scholarships might not be readily available, funding might not be readily available. So you need to know like what the cost benefits are. And even for your time, you know, it's 3 to 4 years. You know, you have to ask yourself, can I give up those 3 to 4 years and just dedicate that to the research? So I would say just do your research on everything, what it means. But yeah, I think if anything, stay true to yourself. I think that's what I would say.
I think honestly, they've said everything that I could have said. You know, just stay true to yourself. It's also okay not to do a PhD, which is weird to say in a session like this, but then it's okay to take another path if you feel like that's what you're called to. Like a PhD, if it's just for the title, I mean, like, it's not worth it if it is just for the title, I would say, because, you know, when I'm in the depths of my struggle, which I know is just barely, you know, I once told my supervisor, gosh, Katrin, it's so hard, it's so difficult, I feel like I don't know anything. And she's like, oh, wow, that's normal. I was like, how is this normal? How is it normal to feel like you don't know anything? But yeah, so if you're sure this is the path for you, it is also rewarding, because even when I feel like I don't know anything, I'm still like, but this is just, it's the only thing I want to do at the moment. You know, it's the only thing I want to immerse myself in. So if you feel that kind of passion, welcome. We will be here to build the networks with you. But if you don't think that, I mean, if you're unsure, give it some time. Or if you think that maybe not, that's also very okay. Yeah.
Great, thanks for those answers. I think that last one is very much to bring the passion to your PhD. I just want to thank you, Stephanie, Adeoti, and Catherine, for giving us some of your time, for answering all the questions. It's super appreciated. To our people who are thinking of PhD,